For over 40 years, we've all been told the same story about John Lennon's murder. It's a story that feels carved in stone, a global icon, a voice for peace, gunned down on a cold New York City night. The story has always been tragically simple: a deranged fan, a copy of The Catcher in the Rye, and a desperate quest for fame. We accepted it because, in a twisted way, it made sense. In a world obsessed with celebrity, the idea that someone would kill to become famous felt like a dark but logical endpoint to the culture Lennon himself helped build. But what if that's not the whole story? What if that simple, clean narrative of a lone gunman was just the perfect cover for something much more disturbing? What if the motive we've all accepted was just the surface layer of a psychological abyss, so deep and dark that understanding it changes how we see the crime itself? For decades, we've focused on the what and the who, but it's the why that has always felt unsettlingly incomplete. Now, by looking again at the evidence of the killer's mind, by piecing together the fragments of a shattered psyche that have been hiding in plain sight, a new picture is emerging. It reveals a motive that wasn't just about fame, it was about something much more sinister. And when you see it, you'll realize the John Lennon mystery is finally solved, and it's not good. The story of John Lennon's murder has always been told the same way: a crazed fan, a copy of The Catcher in the Rye, and a tragic obsession with fame. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the lone gunman narrative was the perfect cover for something far more disturbing? Newly examined evidence about his killer's psychological state reveals a motive that wasn't just about becoming famous. It was about something much more sinister. And when you see it, you'll realize the John Lennon mystery is finally solved. And it's not good. December 8, 1980, started with a burst of creative energy for John Lennon. After 5 years out of the public eye raising his young son Sean, Lennon was back. His new album with Yoko Ono, Double Fantasy, was a celebration of love, family, and a new start. The day pulsed with the promise of this new beginning. It kicked off at their home in the iconic Dakota Building, the Gothic fortress overlooking Central Park, when famed photographer Annie Leibovitz arrived for a Rolling Stone photo. Leibovitz wanted a shot of John alone, but he insisted on being photographed with Yoko. The result is one of history's most intimate and enduring portraits: a naked Lennon, curled in a fetal position around a fully clothed Ono. It was a picture of vulnerability, of love, of a man clinging to his anchor. Leibovitz promised them it would make the cover. Later that day, a radio crew led by journalist Dave Sholin showed up for what would become Lennon's final interview. For hours, Lennon was optimistic and incredibly candid. He talked about his love for Yoko, his joy in being a father, and his artistic rebirth. He was a man at peace with his past and excited for his future, reflecting on his activism and his belief that love was the answer. He was the revolutionary who became a family man, secure in his legacy and ready to build on it. As the afternoon faded, Lennon and Ono got ready to leave for a mixing session at the record plant studio. As they walked from the Dakota's archway to their limo, they were approached by a few fans seeking autographs, a common sight, as Lennon was known for being gracious. One of the figures who stepped forward was a quiet, portly young man clutching a copy of Double Fantasy. His name was Mark David Chapman. He held the album out silently. Lennon, obliging, took it and scribbled John Lennon 1980 on the cover. A freelance photographer named Paul Gorish captured the chilling image of a global icon signing an autograph for the man who would murder him in just a few hours. Chapman took the album back, a faint smile on his face, and melted back into the shadows. He would later claim a voice in his head told him to go home, that the signature was enough. But another, darker voice was much louder. Lennon and Ono spent the next several hours at the studio, finishing the mix for a Yoko song called Walking on Thin Ice. Lennon was proud of the track, energized by the work. It was nearly 11 p.m. when they finally left, deciding to skip dinner and head straight home to say goodnight to their 5-year-old son, Sean. Their limousine pulled up to the Dakota just before 10:50 p.m. Ono got out first. Lennon followed a few steps behind. As Ono passed through the archway, she noticed the same young man from earlier, standing in the shadows. He seemed to look at her intently. A little unnerved, she walked past him. Lennon followed. As he drew level with the man, he seemed to give a slight nod of recognition. Some reports claim that Chapman then called out, "Mr. Lennon." Chapman himself would later say he doesn't recall saying a word. In that split second, either way, the world changed forever, from only a few yards away. Mark David Chapman dropped into what some described as a combat-style stance. He raised a .38 special revolver and fired 5 shots. The sound was deafening. Under the stone archway of the Dakota, 1 bullet missed, hitting a window. 4 found their mark, tearing into John Lennon's back and left shoulder. Chapman had deliberately used hollow-point bullets, a type of ammunition designed to expand on impact and inflict devastating internal damage. Lennon staggered forward, not falling immediately, and managed to get up the 5 steps into the building's reception office. I'm shot," he gasped, before collapsing to the floor. blood pouring from his mouth and chest. Jay Hastings, a Dakota doorman, rushed over in a panic. Hastings took off Lennon's glasses and covered him with his own uniform jacket. Outside, another doorman, Jose Perdomo, ran to Chapman, who had simply dropped his arm to his side. "Do you know what you've just done?" Perdomo screamed. Chapman, eerily calm, replied, "Yes, I just shot John Lennon." Chapman had already put his revolver down. Perdomo kicked it across the pavement, away from him. Chaos erupted. Police were called, but Chapman didn't run. He didn't resist. Instead, he calmly took off his coat, folded it on the ground, and pulled out a paperback book. As sirens wailed, getting closer, Mark David Chapman stood under the archway of the Dakota and began to read J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye. The first police officers on the scene, Steve Spiro and Peter Cullen, found a surreal Lennon was being tended to by the doorman. Yoko Ono was screaming hysterically over his body, and Chapman was leaning against the wall, placidly reading. Recognizing how grave Lennon's injuries were, the officers knew an ambulance would take too long. They made a split-second call, carefully lifted Lennon into the back of their patrol car, and sped towards Roosevelt Hospital. But it was too late. The damage was catastrophic. Despite the frantic efforts of a team of doctors, John Lennon had lost over 80% of his blood. He was pronounced dead on arrival at 11:15 p.m. The news spread like a shockwave. Famously announced to a national audience by Howard Cosell during Monday Night Football. Crowds began to gather, first at the hospital, then in a silent candlelit vigil outside the Dakota that grew to thousands. The world was plunged into a state of collective grief. A man who had urged the world to give peace a chance was gone. But as the world mourned, investigators were left with the chilling question, why? Why would a 25-year-old former security guard from Hawaii, with no criminal record, murder a man he once claimed to admire? The answer, they would soon find, was locked away in a mind far more broken than anyone could have imagined. To understand the explosion of violence on December 8th, you have to look into the fractured life of the man who pulled the trigger. Mark David Chapman wasn't born a monster. He grew up in Decatur, Georgia, in what looked like a normal suburban home. His father was in the Air Force, and his mother was a nurse. But behind closed doors, the household was deeply troubled. Chapman described his father as abusive toward his mother, creating an atmosphere of fear that left young Mark feeling isolated and worthless. At school, he was an unpopular, introverted kid who was an easy target for bullies. So, he retreated into a fantasy world. For a time, that fantasy was the Beatles. Like millions of other kids, he learned guitar and idolized John Lennon. But even then, you could see signs of an obsessive, all-or-nothing personality. His fantasies weren't just about liking the music, they were about becoming his heroes. As a teenager, Chapman's life took a sharp turn when he became a born-again Christian. His religious fervor was just as intense as his Beatles fandom had been. He worked as a camp counselor and was surprisingly popular with the children, earning the nickname the Pied Piper. But his rigid new beliefs soon clashed with his old idols. He became enraged by Lennon's famous 1966 quote about the Beatles being more popular than Jesus. In Chapman's black and white world, this was blasphemy. The love he once had for the artist began to curdle into a resentful obsession. From there, Chapman's mental state began a slow, steady decline. He wrestled with severe depression and a crippling sense of alienation. He briefly attended college, but dropped out. He moved to Hawaii for a fresh start, got married, and took a job as a security guard. It seemed like he might find some stability, but his internal world was falling apart. His mind was becoming a prison of looping, obsessive thoughts about his own inadequacy. Psychiatrists who later examined him would offer a variety of diagnoses, but it was clear he was experiencing psychosis. He heard auditory hallucinations, voices, him authentic. It was an idea so divorced from reality that it leads to an even more disturbing question. Was that idea entirely his own? Mark David Chapman's journey to the Dakota was not a straight line. It was a chaotic, 2-month descent, marked by indecision and a chilling battle between his fleeting grasp on reality and the delusions that were consuming him. In late October 1980, Chapman quit his job as a security guard in Hawaii. In the logbook, where he was supposed to sign his own name, he wrote John Lennon. He then flew to New York for the first time, planning to kill his former idol. He waited outside the Dakota, but couldn't go through with it, later claiming that seeing the film Ordinary People temporarily snapped him out of it. He flew back to Hawaii and confessed everything to his wife. He showed her the gun. He told her of his obsession. Terrified, she made no report to the police or any mental health authority, arguably the single greatest missed opportunity to prevent the tragedy. Chapman's psychological state was now in freefall. He was hearing what he called an inaudible voice that repeated a single command over and over. Do it, do it, do it. He felt powerless to disobey. He even made appointments with mental health professionals, but he was falling through the cracks of a system that wasn't equipped to catch him. By early December, the darker voice had won. He told his wife he was going back to New York to get his head straight. She believed him. He checked into a hotel and began wrestling with his mission. He later told his parole board about the intense tug-of-war he felt. On one hand, he had this all-consuming drive to kill the phony Lennon. On the other, a small part of him, the part that was still Mark Chapman, was horrified. This is what makes his first encounter with Lennon that afternoon so chilling. When Lennon signed his album, Chapman had a moment of clarity. He had his trophy. He could just go home. He later said, "I do remember having the thought of, hey, you have got the album now. Just go home." But there was no way I was just going to go home. He was too far in. The voice in his head was louder than his own conscience. He waited for hours as the temperature dropped. A brooding presence in the archway that no one could see for what he was. No one could see the storm raging inside him. And so, when limo pulled up just before 11 p.m., the battle was over. The delusion had won. For decades, the world has accepted a simple motive. Chapman killed Lennon for fame. Chapman himself has even reinforced this, saying he sought self-glory and wanted to become a somebody. It's a clean explanation for an unthinkable act, but it's also dangerously incomplete. To say Chapman was only motivated by fame is to ignore the terrifying depths of his psychosis. The real motive is far more sinister, not because of a conspiracy, but because it involves the complete annihilation of a human mind. The fame motive is a rationalization, a label slapped onto an act that was fundamentally irrational. The real driver was a delusional belief system so powerful it had its own moral code. Chapman didn't just want his name in the papers. He believed he was a soldier in a cosmic war against phoniness, and John Lennon was the enemy general. This wasn't the thinking of a fame seeker. This was the thinking of a man who believed he was getting instructions from supernatural forces. This is where the story takes its darkest turn. While there's no credible evidence that Chapman was a mind-controlled CIA assassin, those theories persist because Chapman's actions were so bizarre, his mental state so extreme, that the lone nut explanation feels thin. He was the perfect kind of killer, one whose motives were so intensely personal and insane that no one would think to look for a larger influence. Think about the context of the time. John Lennon wasn't just a musician. He was a powerful political figure. The U.S. government had spied on him, kept extensive FBI files on him, and had actively tried to deport him for his anti-war activism. After 5 years of silence, he was re-emerging in 1980. Right as the conservative Reagan era was beginning, there were powerful people in the world who saw Lennon's message of peace as dangerous. Did these forces program Mark David Chapman? Almost certainly not, but the sinister truth might be more subtle. Chapman, in his psychotic state, created a delusion that perfectly aligned with the unspoken desires of an establishment that feared Lennon. He wasn't a programmed killer, but his psychosis made him a self-programmed one. The voices in his head were his own, but they were speaking a language of violent retribution that served a political end, whether he knew it or not. The true sinister motive, then, isn't a government plot. It's the horrifying fact that a man's mind can break in such a way that it becomes a perfect, unwitting tool. Chapman's desire wasn't for fame as we know it. He wanted to erase his own identity, the insecure, failed version of himself, and replace it with the identity of Holden Caulfield, the righteous killer of phonies. He murdered John Lennon not to become somebody, but to destroy the somebody he already was. And in doing so, he silenced a global voice for peace at a pivotal moment. In history, it was an act that felt like a political assassination, even if the only conspiracy was the one inside his own broken mind. In the wake of the murder, Chapman's calm demeanor was one of the most disturbing things to investigators. He had accomplished his mission, and a strange peace had settled over him. His legal team, recognizing his clear state of delusion, planned an insanity defense. 6 different defense experts concluded he was psychotic. It seemed like an open and shut case, but Chapman sabotaged it himself. In June of 1981, he made a stunning announcement. He wanted to withdraw his insanity plea and plead guilty. His own lawyer was stunned, arguing that Chapman wasn't mentally competent to make that decision. But Chapman insisted, telling the judge that God had spoken to him and told him to confess. The judge accepted the plea, and Chapman was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. Over the years, as he's come up for parole again and again, Chapman's story has shifted. The messianic fervor is gone, replaced by what looks like remorse. In hearings, he has called the murder despicable and selfish. He has admitted he did it for attention, stating, "I wanted to be a somebody, and nothing was going to stop that." He has apologized to Yoko Ono, and even said he deserved the death penalty. But is this genuine remorse, or just another performance? Is it a calculated attempt to say what a parole board wants to hear? His words often simplify his motive to a quest for glory, a narrative that's easier to live with than the terrifying reality of his own madness. The parole board has repeatedly denied his release, citing the selfish disregard for human life and the worldwide impact of his crime. He remains in prison, an aging man forever defined by the 5 shots he fired on a cold December night. The story of John Lennon's death is a vortex of fame, madness, and cultural trauma. As we've seen, peeling back the layers reveals something far more complex than the simple story we were all told. If you believe there's more to the official stories we hear and want to see more content that digs for the truth, please take a moment to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep asking the hard questions. So, is the John Lennon mystery finally solved? In a sense, yes. But the solution isn't a new clue or a shadowy conspirator. The solution is accepting a far more uncomfortable truth. The motive wasn't a simple quest for fame. It was a symptom of a catastrophic systems failure. A failure of the mental health system to help a man who was crying out for it. A failure of those close to him to see the danger. And a societal failure to understand the toxic mix of celebrity worship and deep-seated alienation. Mark David Chapman wasn't just a crazed fan. He was a mentally ill man whose specific delusions, his war on phoniness, made him a self-activated weapon against a cultural icon who preached peace. The not good part of the solution is realizing that it wasn't a grand conspiracy that killed John Lennon. It was something far more common, and therefore, far more terrifying. The quiet, untreated disintegration of a human mind. The mystery isn't who pulled the trigger. The true mystery is the nature of the mind that made the choice, and the realization that the line between a troubled individual and a history-altering tragedy can be terrifyingly thin. John Lennon's legacy is his music. The chilling legacy of his death is the question that still haunts us. How many others are out there, waiting for a voice in their head to tell them what to do?